sunny up here. It's sunny up here in northern Vermont too. Kind of windy, but anyhow, I understand that you're the go-to guy on brownfields. Tell us what's going on as far as you
Sure.
know in terms of the spending from last year, what the governor's proposing
Yep.
this year, and what you see in this bill for brownfields.
Great. Thank you so much. For the record, my name is Tom Kennedy. I'm the Director of Community Development for the Montescotney Regional Commission. Just formally, I was the Executive Director, and I changed positions on January 1st. And no, I am not retired. So I always get those questions. So just to bring you back to what we did last year in FY22, actually through the efforts of your committee, Mr. Chair, the legislature appropriated $25 million in general fund for brownfields. $14 million went to the Department of Environmental Conservation for what we call bearer projects. And bearer projects are these large, complex brownfields, and it's called the Brownfield Economic Revitalization Alliance. $1 million went to the Regional Planning Commissions for brownfield assessment, and that was through a subgrant with the Agency of Commerce. $10 million went to the Agency of Commerce to establish or create a revolving loan fund for private, public, and nonprofit entities. And I'll get into this in a second, but what the committee did is we are granting these funds with a 10% match, and the funding is based upon a corrective action plan. Through the efforts of the Department of Environmental Conservation and ACCD, we developed a review committee, and it's composed of Regional Planning Commission members, which I am a part of, Regional Development Corporation, ACCD, and DEC. So what we do is review applications that come into the Agency of Commerce for the revolving loan fund, and we've created a matrix that scores them. We then approve or disapprove, and our approval then goes to the administration for their final award. So to date, as of early February, the revolving loan fund has awarded $3.9 million. We have at this point about $5 million in requests, and we're getting new applications all the time as the assessment work continues and corrective action plans are created. So to date, and related to the great work that your committee is doing, we have approved grants for the following projects: the Community Development Support Inc., which is located in Brattleboro, and with the use of these funds, that'll create 19 housing units. Needle Pine LLC in Burlington, that's 49 units. South Champlain Street, 157 South Champlain Street, 48 units. And then the city of Winooski is using some of their funding to build a parking garage and then an 80-unit hotel. There is also other projects that are related to economic development. If you'd like me, I can go into those later.
I'm a little confused.
Sure.
So you switch from brownfield remediation to building units. Are these units
So no, what we're doing is supporting the redevelopment or new units through the use of the brownfield program. Those sites that I just mentioned are brownfield sites,
so
or have some form of contamination.
The money is going to be used to clean up the site, and the housing units will be built on the site.
That is correct.
It's all part of a comprehensive project. They're
exactly
okay.
What we're trying to do here is to partner with the housing groups to get housing stock created.
Great. Okay.
Which is,
sorry about that.
It's great to get these brownfields cleaned up.
Exactly. We have also so to date we've cleaned up we have funded for, and it'll result in about 16 acres of cleanup. And through these different activities, the applicants say about 480 jobs would be created through either construction or through the brownfield cleanup project. So now I'm going to turn to the bearer program, which is, again, I said earlier, we got $14 million. The JNL1 project located in Springfield has encumbered $4 million for the first phase of the demolition. They need an additional $4 million to complete the demolition. Fonda Container in St. Albans has encumbered $2.3 million. And then just recently, there's finally going to be a property transfer for the 453 Pine Street, and we're earmarking $6 million for that project. So these three projects alone will encumber $16.3 million, with over $20 million needed for the existing projects for cleanup. So we already have 16 million in just these three projects and in sites that we have online. And not all of these are bearer sites, but we need at least an additional $20 million.
An additional $20 million over the 16?
Yes, that's correct. The
And-
16 is already, will be, if we take the three sites, JNL1 needs $8 million. Fonda is going to need $2.3 million, which has already been encumbered, and Pine Street will need $6 million. So of that, $12.3 million, $12.3 million has already been encumbered
Okay.
of the bearer funds. Does that make sense?
It does.
Of the
but-
14.
So for the other $20 million, you're looking to further appropriations
Correct.
from the administration?
So I'm going to get to my ask in 1 second.
Okay,
And then finally, the RPC assessment program, 50% of the 1 million has already been sent out. And we figure that by the summer of 2022, that $1 million will all be encumbered. So what we did as a first time effort is we provided 50% of the $1 million to all the participating RPCs. Just for the record, NVDA did not participate because they had EPA monies. So our need is the governor in his budget is recommending $6 million in brownfield funding. And right now it's earmarked for DED. It's unclear whether or not the Economic Development Department is then going to reallocate that to its partners, or whether it's just going to go into the revolving loan fund. We are requesting an appropriation of $15 million from the general fund. And I want to emphasize that ARPA funds cannot be used for brownfield cleanup. We have to use general fund money. And what the ask is $2.2 million for the RPCs to continue the assessment work, $4 million to the JNL1 project through the bearer program, and then $9 million. And I have ideas on how that should be spent, but I would leave it up to the committee to decide how they would like to allocate those funds.
Sorry.
So we're asking for $9 million above the governor's recommend.
okay. Do you have all this in writing or
Yes,
some-
I'll send it to the committee, and I also have some other things that I can give to the committee.
Okay. Okay.
This has been a great program, and I have to say the partners have worked really well together. We are sharing our information. We're using a common application, and it's been working smoothly. And I'm proud of the work. I'm on the committee. We are also the regional. Mark is also the one who is administering the statewide RPC assessment program as well.
Have you been asked to present to the Appropriations Committee at all?
I testified yesterday in House Commerce Committee. And what I did last year, Mr. Chairman, is I discussed this with your committee first. You then sent a recommendation to Senate Appropriations, and then we testified at a later date.
Okay.
So I don't quite know how to work this at this point in time.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Clarkson.
Thanks, Tom. I guess I'm not I guess your numbers earlier when you were going through the three big projects of what's already been encumbered and what you still need to get them ready to turn them into housing. So that, to me, that's, construction ready. How much more is needed? Adds up to much more than what your final ask ends up being. I mean, if, and so that's one question. I'd like to clarify that because, and then the second question is, as we anticipate infrastructure money coming additionally, which isn't ARPA money, it's infrastructure money. Is any of that allocated to brownfields?
So let me answer your first question.
Yeah.
Is I am not asking for funding to be able to complete all the projects.
Oh, okay.
I'm a big boy. I understand we have limitations, but 15 million could go a long way. And that then leads to your second question is, we just recently got some information from EPA. There's going to be a new round of funding from EPA. The problem with the EPA funding in Vermont has been, and there's always been winners and losers, and it's never been statewide. So some of the, and generally it's usually the regional planning commission. Some regional planning commissions get funded, others do not. What's really nice about this program is that it's statewide. We're really paying attention to geographic distribution. The other thing about this funding is the EPA funds have a 20% match. And so we could get this additional EPA funds, but use this funds for match. The number of applications we're getting because it's a grant is pretty amazing. And then finally, if for some reason, we weren't able to use all this money because we got so much EPA money, then obviously we return to the general fund. Personally, I don't see that happening. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. That
Yep.
Clear it up.
Yeah.
I don't know that even the $5 million or the $6 million the governor has asked for, it has a home in the draft 4.1 that we have. That doesn't mean it couldn't have one. Where did you make this $15 million request to ACCD and they just could not get it past the governor? Is that what's going on?
They are staying, as you know, they work for the administration and they're sticking with the administration's budget. Yesterday, I testified as well as Trish Coppolino, who's the head of the Brownfield program. And in her testimony, she showed the committee how much funding they needed. And she did mention the $20 million that would be necessary with just even some of the existing sites. Remember, as we do more and more of this assessment, we're going to be bringing on more and more sites. So, but to date, I have not had success working with the administration as far as saying, yeah, they would advocate this. The other thing is I'm somewhat of an orphan here, don't know really where to go to get this funding put in at this time, outside of just doing a direct appropriation through one of the appropriation committees.
The tie to housing is, I think, very important for us and to downtown redevelopment. So I think it's kind of a natural with us.
Yeah, in all candor, it just worked so well last year, working first with you folks and then moving forward with that. So I know in-house commerce, prior to my testimony yesterday, there's $5 million in there for brownfields, and it's just not enough. I mean, also, if I can be parochial for a second,
$5 million in their letter to their appropriations committee.
Well, they haven't submitted it yet, but yes. Mm-hmm. And the same with House Natural, but I have not had an opportunity to talk in House Natural yet. So I'm going to have to go directly to the appropriation committees.
So is your organization that you work for now, are you considered one of the regional planning agencies?
Yes.
Okay.
We just changed our name, so we're still a regional planning commission.
Okay, so there's one question I wanted to ask you and Peter about in the bill that, have you looked at the bill at all lately?
I have, Peter, Peter, who's going to be testifying after me, has spent more time on it, but I have spent some time on it.
It has to do with eliminating the requirement for water systems or community alternative water systems to be part of, I think, the NDAs as a
Mhm.
requirement. Are you familiar with that provision?
Yes. Mhm.
Talk about that a little bit and the wisdom of that.
Yeah, Peter, I thought was going to chat about.
Okay, if you want to leave it to Peter, why don't we?
Question of, you could defer to Peter if you'd rather.
Well, yeah, let Peter answer. I just know that, when we talked about, we really want to try to develop more density in our villages and in these NDA systems, NDA areas. We need to have some community-based systems be able to support that density, or we're just never going to get the density. We're going to be having these 2-acre lots and so on throughout, so we just won't get it.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions for Tom at this point?
No, but I'm so grateful you're doing this. This is sort of the classic example of the sort of hidden money it takes to actually be able to have a property ready to redevelop. And it's so much money, and people don't, they appreciate the housing. They appreciate what they can see, and they can see that nothing's happening with these sites that are contaminated. But I'm so grateful that we've had enough money to really kind of make movement on some of these key properties that are in our downtowns and would make such a huge difference to our communities if they were functional and productive. So,
and it's really important with most of the downtowns. We're doing a project right now with Evernorth in Windsor. It's going to be about 22 units. And of course, it's a brownfield site, and we're not sure, but roughly they're estimating it's about a $300,000 cleanup. It's difficult for these groups that are relying on tax credit and other things to get the funds to do this. So it can be deal killers for them, because they just can't make up the difference. It just doesn't make their performance work. So I will send you my testimony, and I'll send you some other information. And I guess I will check in later with you folks as far as how I should proceed from here.
Okay.
And thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well,
Okay,
yeah.
Peter, can you join us at this point? Hi, Peter. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
I'm gonna find my notes here. So I want you to just give us your overall thoughts on parts of the bill that relate to your work, and specifically the question I just asked. I know there seems to be some controversy around the section of eliminating community wastewater systems as a requirement for designation. That's what I'm trying to find, but maybe you could just take it from there.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Peter Gregory, Director of Two Rivers Adequachi Regional Commission, headquartered down in Woodstock. I want to thank the committee for your continued work on housing. We certainly support what you've been doing and the complexity of the issue that you're dealing with. So before I get into the question that was posed to Mr. Kennedy, who deferred to me on that, I would just like to kind of walk through the bill, if I may, and
Sure.
give you the thoughts that I have on the different sections that, like you said, affect planning and what we do. The section 2 of the permit reform changes, I certainly support all of that. I did work with a group, including Representative Bongartz over the fall to suggest some of these things as well. Then I would skip forward to section 13 on the bylaw modernization grant. Certainly I support that section of the bill. It's quite a need in light of the fact that the traditional municipal planning grant program has migrated away from helping towns work on bylaws. So this is very targeted support for a very specific purpose. So I definitely support what you did last year and putting it in statute.
And Peter, before Mr. Chair, if I may,
Go ahead.
but as I recall, Peter, you actually had a new number for us for this. You had done work identifying the number. It was the cost, 409. Do I remember rightly? It's like $493,000.
Yes, it was. I had not heard from all regional planning commissions when I pulled them a few days ago, but we were right bumping up to the $500,000 limit or slightly above. So that's
Right.
what I believe the need is.
Okay, great. Thanks.
And I guess that's just an estimate, certainly.
Yeah.
I would say that I do support your witness from VHCB, Jen Holler, suggested that affordability be integrated into the program description. I think that's entirely appropriate. Interesting that she suggested it tie back to municipal town or town plan. I would say that a lot of the town plans need as much improvement in specificity around the affordability issue as do bylaws. So that would kind of point back to the need to take a look at chapter 117, the planning side, and modernize that. So we integrate the new issues, towns face around housing and around climate and things like that. But just note that town plans need some attention as well, and some more clarity and refinement around affordability. The one issue that I would raise in the municipal bylaw grant that is problematic is section 13B, which allows DHCD to use up to 10% of the funds for the administration of this. I think the intent may have been to allow the administration of the new bylaw modernization grant, but where the section is located in this draft bill, draft 4.1, it's on top of the entire municipal and regional planning fund, which would yield, the department $500,000, and it will be to administer our grants and VCGI and everything else that's funded under the municipal regional planning fund. And certainly I can't support that. And if the administration believes they need, 5 positions and $500,000 to administer things they're already administering, they should suggest that in their budget submission. So I would suggest that that be taken out of the overall and put back under just as a section H, perhaps there on page 19.
On this draft 4.1, it's cut out.
Well, but then it's
Is it
reinserted.
reinserted?
Yes.
Where?
So this is an issue that's still, it's a sort of an unusual provision to talk about caps on administrative funds, but we're still trying to find out is this a special fund? And there's a need for that if there's a special fund. But we'll fix that, Peter. Don't worry.
Okay. Yeah, I think
that was not the intent.
Okay, good. I think there definitely is a need for that. Section 14 tax credits, I certainly support that. I was on the Downtown Development Board for years and saw the impact it had in our communities. And we have a lot of villages and downtowns in our region, and we see its impact. So we certainly support that. The affordability issue in section 16 that Jen Holler raised, I had some similar concerns about the need for that. And then section 18, under the Act 250 appeals, I didn't think it was proper to hurt A&R's financial bottom line if the environmental division doesn't act in a timely manner, since A&R had already done the review and earned the money. I'd certainly much rather have a professional natural resources board than the judges do appeals anyway, but that's another topic for another day and perhaps another committee. So that's kind of a summary of those issues that I wanted to talk about. And then you had a question that you raised with Tom Kennedy about removing the need for community wastewater systems for NDAs.
Right.
And although I did participate in some of the discussions on that, I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember the justification for that. And I know Ellen was intimately involved in all of those discussions, and perhaps the reason for that. It seemed like more of a technical correction than a change in policy, but unfortunately, I would ask that you check with her on that.
Well, my question is there any other, I mean, I guess what was the reason that was originally put in? And is there alternative protection now through the town plans or through bylaws or something that, I mean, I guess we don't want to see a lot of the benefits of getting an NDA classification go to areas that include a lot of large lot, single family developments with their own septic systems. But I'm just projecting.
Yes, no, I hear your question and I hear your point, and I see that Ellen has rejoined and stuff. And again, I think it's best at this point that I try not to explain something I can't quite remember the details on.
So you're not looking at this as, you're looking at more as technical change. It reflects what goes on now, and it's not that big of a deal either way. It doesn't necessarily promote more housing or necessarily cause more damage to the environment.
Yeah, certainly, I would consider myself and my organization very strong environmental, thinking. So no, I did not see that at the time as being problematic.
Okay. And one other question I asked before was, we're injecting the concept of a qualified flood mitigation project and also flood mitigation grants, money to be used for flood mitigation. Is that in this bill, do you see that as a tie-in to ultimately developing more housing somehow?
I believe that it does. If we can flood-proof buildings in our villages and built-up areas, and provide some infill opportunities and provide some tax credits for that mitigation and flood-proofing, that's where we want the development to happen. But we want to make sure it provides for safer buildings,
Okay.
and that any mitigation project, although it doesn't say so, does not increase or does not cause the loss of any flood storage.
Okay. Well, any other questions for Senator Clarkson?
Thanks, Peter. I've heard from the downtown organizations who are feeling that with all this money and all this additional focus on our work in increasing density in their downtown areas and their designated downtowns, that they need more resources to deal with the amount coming through their organizations. How does the additional resource that you've asked for the RPCs to help do this work, to help navigate all this ARPA money and all the work we're doing, is that enough to help? I mean, how closely do you work with the downtown organizations, and how can we best help them? I mean, you as a planner work with these organizations. How can we best help them with this sort of surge of attention, money, and work?
Well, I know the town of Woodstock would probably have sought a downtown designation had they felt they could fund a downtown organization to do what's necessary to keep it running. I know Bradford lost its downtown designation because their local group didn't have the capacity over time
Exactly.
to do this, and town government was not there to step up. It's my understanding that the downtown organizations have the same needs that everybody else does, and if we want the designated downtowns to work and be functional, perhaps they do need the support, and I believe they have sought a nominal amount per designated downtown to help them.
And who speaks for them? Is there because it's unclear to me who advocates for them in this process of trying to get more help.
I believe there's a newly created association of downtown groups that work on administering the downtown program in their
Right.
downtowns.
Yeah,
And, it is that group.
Yes, we've had a letter from them. And I think just as we look at this, I do think we've looked at navigators for our developing our accessory dwelling units. We understand the need there. And I think we're missing hearing from the designated downtowns. As we work through this bill, it's just becoming clearer and clearer that more and more is being placed on those organizations, which we require if you are a designated downtown.
Right. I think this is just yet another example, Senator Clarkson, where we thankfully have the general fund and the federal infusion of dollars to actually build programs, but it's the on the ground work that is usually not remembered that it takes to make these things come together. Tom Kennedy talked about the amount of effort it takes to pull together housing projects and work with the different groups and accessing different funding streams. It's real time and it has a cost, and it's usually the difference between success and failure is the capacity of groups to do this kind of work.
So are you saying that the downtown organizations who are making a plea for resources, that any downtown that has a designation has to have one of those groups?
Yes.
Yes, and I think that's in statute, and I think Chris Cochran can better articulate the responsibilities of the designated downtown to obtain and retain that designation and to do the reporting that's required. I'm not here to advocate for an appropriation for the downtown groups. I would let them advocate for themselves. But what I am saying is I've seen, through a lot of experience that it's not easy work, and there are a lot of times volunteers, and I can see why they believe they could use some assistance to make their downtowns function as well as they should.
Yeah, I think we have a request from Brattleboro to have this addressed. I don't know whether it belongs in this bill or in S-263, our Omnibus Economic Development Bill, but they have asked, she's the policy lead, Stephanie Bonin in Brattleboro is the policy lead for the downtown coalition of these organizations. So I think we just need to decide where we,
given the timing, I think we'll kick that over to the Economic Development Bill and see if we can find out a little bit more information
Right.
of what their sources of
Yeah.
funding is right now. Okay, I guess that's appreciated very much, Peter. I think that's all we have for now. Before we move on to missing middle, I just would like, Ellen, your name has been invoked in terms of maybe knowing more about the history of removing in one of the drafts, removing the community wastewater system. Could you educate us a little bit about this issue, perhaps?
No. I guess I would just add, so can you be more specific? What community, what section are you talking about?
Section 2A, I think.
From the neighborhood, the designated neighborhood development area requirements.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And you wanted to know what? Why it was
jumping between committees, so it's hard.
I just wanted to understand, Peter mentioned you being involved in some meetings around this, and I just wanted to understand what's going on. My understanding is that that in 511, the stakeholders got together and they saw this as an impediment to housing development. And so I'm just trying to understand why it may have been part of the requirements for designation, and what's the ramifications potentially of taking it out.
And Senator, I was in those discussions as well.
Okay.
And it's simply a technical correction. It's simply that you're going to need a permit to have any sort of wastewater location. I mean, we as a group, I believe Ellen was on some of these, the Regina, the Bennington Regional Planning Commission Executive Director and others debated this over and over, whether we should just leave the language because then people wouldn't feel like we're taking away a requirement to have a permitted wastewater system, or just take it all out, because the problem is alternative system has a definition. And in some locales, folks may have a wastewater solution in a neighborhood development area that isn't technically an alternative system, and that still may work, and they'll still have to get a permit. So that calling out those specific elements serve no purpose, because of course you're going to have a permitted system in order to put new housing units in it. So it's not really meant to, I think, give people this much pause. Put it back in, leave it out. The end result is the same. You're going to need permits in order to build housing units in those areas.
But I thought the way I was reading as a layperson is, and I thought that the permits you would need under existing law to have the designation had to be sort of congregate or community based, and taking it out, does that allow a development where every home has its own wastewater system?
It really wouldn't work in most situations, but there may be a double lot that you can expand the number of units by having a shared system and certain. It's just giving more options to meet the required wastewater requirements of any housing development in a dense area. If you want more technical, I think the folks that were debating whether to leave as is or just take this out, because it tells you a bunch of options, but doesn't give the full story, and why the sort of policy folks suggested just take it out because it wasn't really serving as much of a purpose. I'm not an expert in this area. Just I remember those conversations clearly.
Sounds like they were painful.
So I would just add respectfully, I disagree with what the commissioner just said. I don't think this could be considered a technical correction in any way. This is setting the requirements for what a neighborhood would need to be designated under the state requirements. So this is what the municipality needs to demonstrate they have before they can get that requirement, before they can get their designation. Having the designation then opens up these areas for incentives. Yes, development in general requires a permit for wastewater regardless. This is requiring that the municipality demonstrate upfront that there is already infrastructure in place, whether that be municipal infrastructure or an alternative system. So it's demonstrating that this area already has infrastructure for wastewater in place before they receive the designation and therefore the incentives.
And that's exactly the point, that this may be looked at as, oh, we don't have those, so never mind. We're not going to pursue this designation and go through the planning that will ultimately require them to get a system that meets a permit. And so if it can be looked at as a disincentive to pursue the designation because we don't already have this in place. And so this was the planner debate. Well, take it out, because once they get the designation, in order to incur that development, they're going to have to get an approved system to make it all work. And so it was looked at as a first stop barrier. And the conversations I was on, no one in the sort of planning world was feeling like we were giving away permits or encouraging less development in these areas. It was simply giving people a chance to pursue this designation without feeling like they already needed to have systems in place that they would need to put in place before housing could be built. Because, the requirements of the designation area all speak about more dense development in very rural areas that don't have it. So it's really not, I think, as big of put it back in, take it out. I think the community debated this, and I think I was one that said, if we take this out, it's going to be perceived as we got rid of a bunch of requirements for building that's not the case here. And so if it sows confusion, I don't think it's helpful.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner, but that was not exactly what it was related to what I was saying, but this is about the requirements on the town. So yes, permits will be needed for wastewater. If the town doesn't have the infrastructure in place as is required under this designation currently, moving forward, if you remove that requirement, yes, development that is added will need to get a permit from ANR. But this is removing the requirement on the town. And I do think, yes, that it is currently a barrier to towns getting it because the infrastructure may not be in place in all of these towns currently. So that is part of the discussion as well. These are the requirements that the town needs to demonstrate to get the designation.
Okay, it sounds like it's a certainly an interesting argument, and it doesn't seem like the advocates for taking it out care that much about taking it out. So we'll have a committee discussion and make a decision. That's why we get paid the big bucks. So anyhow, let's move on to missing middle. I want to start off with I'm sorry. We have Graham Campbell here from JFO to give us a brief update on his projections on the removal of sales and use tax on building materials for PHP products. Graham, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator. For the record, my name is Graham Campbell. I work at the Joint Fiscal Office, and I was asked by Senator Sorokin to look into a sales tax exemption on building materials for housing project or for priority housing projects. I worked with Pat Titterton in our office to look at this, and I also want to quickly say thank you to Chris Cochran, Jen Holler, and Kathy Byer, who helped me a lot on this estimate. I always like doing housing stuff because the group is so helpful in this world. So more or less, I'll get right to the point. We estimate that this would reduce sales tax revenues by $1.25 million in fiscal year 23, if enacted in fiscal year or in 23, and then growing to about $1.75 to $2 million per year beginning in fiscal year 24. Because this is the sales tax, it impacts the education fund solely, and $1.25 million is under half a penny roughly on the average homestead tax rate. I want to emphasize that this estimate was based upon information provided by Chris and Jen. But it is, I guess what I would say is subject to a lot of uncertainty to the extent that we see a lot more priority housing projects getting built. It doesn't take much to make this estimate larger or smaller is what I would say. So based upon the figures that I have, more or less for every average priority housing project that gets built, an average one that we estimate would cost the ed fund and sales tax about $200,000. So it doesn't take many more. So if we add, 3-4 additional priority housing projects above this estimate, you're talking an extra $800,000 or so. So also be less than that. This is sort of our best guess estimate. So, but I want to sort of give the committee our sense of the level of uncertainty that this would have. So to, I guess, wrap it up. Yeah.
Couple of questions. In terms of implementation, is there anything magical or unusual that, how an individual builder going into Lowe's and buying stuff, is that a tried and true thing to get the exemption and to track it? And I understand like nonprofits probably go in and don't have sales tax imposed on building materials they buy. Is there any complication in that regard that you know?
With respect to just this exemption, I don't think this exemption creates any more complexity with respect to the sales tax on building materials. I think sales taxes paid on building materials in general is sort of a complex area. As you mentioned, if a contractor goes into Lowe's and buys supplies, they're almost certain to pay the sales tax on that. But if a contractor is working, directly with someone because the contractor is the final sale in that case. But if they are sort of buying and then, handing it off, or if they're a distributor of sorts, then the sales tax gets paid there. So I would say, I don't think I am prepared enough to speak to this committee exactly how the sales tax applies to every case in building materials. But I can say that that's a somewhat complicated area of sales tax law. But I don't think it's complicated by this exemption. I think that's another factor, as you mentioned, the nonprofit aspect of this is an area that does create additional uncertainty here. Nonprofits generally are exempt from the sales tax. However, it's my understanding, speaking with the advocates in this area, that sometimes the nonprofit, while they're sort of overseeing the project, it's actually built by sort of a private developer of sorts, and so they would be subject to the sales tax. So to the extent that nonprofits do actually are hiring their own crews and building, then they would be exempt. But if they're sort of contracting out with a private entity, then they would pay sales tax. And so sort of trying to shave out those types of builds from this estimate was something that we tried to do, but it's I guess subject to a lot of uncertainty. But that is something that we accounted for, is that sort of relationship.
Do you know enough to give us an estimate of what percentage savings there would be on the cost of an overall project by eliminating the sales and use tax on building supplies?
On an average project,
Well, on a project, how does the 6% saving on building, I guess, what percentage of a typical project is building supplies? I mean, are we saving 1% of the cost of the project? Are we saving 3% of the cost of the project?
yeah, so it's a little difficult to know exactly, but generally what I've been told is about half of the cost of a total development cost is construction materials.
Okay.
And so you're saving for a median project, based on the data that I have, the sort of sales tax savings is about $200,000 on materials. And so I can't tell you exactly what that is based upon the data I have, because I've inflated the cost of construction materials, but not the total cost of development. So this data I have is from 2017 roughly. And so it's hard to say exactly what share, but it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 4% of total development costs is what you'd be saving.
Okay. I get a little nervous in this area because I remember getting involved. I think it had something to do with current use, where you bought like ATVs and stuff, and whether you were using it for planting or recreation, and it all, wound up being decided at the point of sale, and someone got a certificate or didn't get a certificate, and something that seems so uncomplicated became very complicated very quickly. So
yeah, and I do think you might want to have the tax department in to talk about potentially if there's any administration issues here. But typically how this would work is that the entity that would be building the priority housing project would fill out an exemption certificate, printed off from the tax department, and give it to the seller that they're buying the materials from. And the seller collects those. And in the event that they are audited by the tax department, they have those exemption certificates available. And so that's how I would imagine this would work. And I don't imagine it would require any sort of additional administration costs on the part of the Department of Taxes.
Okay, great. Senator Brock.
Graham, can you tell us what's the total amount of project cost that this would apply to, estimated?
So I've been told by advocates in this area that construction material costs the amount of cost is subject to this exemption is about 50% of total development cost.
But I mean, total dollars is what I'm talking about that we would spend in this area that this particular exemption might apply to. And that includes project labor, everything else.
Oh, so if we're So based upon my estimate, it's about, we're estimating about 20 to $25 million worth of materials would be spent. So the total amount of development, if we're assuming that 50% rule, would be in sort of the 40 to $50 million range of.
So you implied that the 25 million would be the cost on which a sales tax would be based. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
And so on that, let's say 25 million, you've got potential savings of, I think you said somewhere between 2 and 4%. Is that correct?
On the just the construction side, you would have a total savings of 6%, and then it's about, I'm guessing, 2 to 4% on the total.
2 to 4% on the total, and the total is 25 million, or is the 25 million the actual cost of materials?
It's the cost of materials. So the total would be probably
6% of that. Then is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And so that's why I'm saying, like, I don't know exact. I'm guessing it's somewhere in the 2 to 4% range. It would depend by project, but if I'm assuming about 20 to 25 million in construction costs and 50% of the total cost of development is construction costs, then we're talking about 40 to 50 million of total development. And so, 1.25 million of 50 is, 2-ish%.
Okay.
Okay.
So if you assume, though, the savings that you would get as a result of that, is it reasonable to assume that you would be able, with the same amount of money, to build more things like housing, which is what we're trying to do?
I mean, the numbers I'm saying right now are just an aggregate. And so it really depends upon the size of the project. When I say size of the project, I mean the total amount of development costs. So, we're estimating that on a median project based upon the data. So if the building that's happened in the past continues as it's happened, or like it's going to continue, we're going to get sort of unit housing projects in sort of the 20 to 25 unit range. Then you're talking about $200,000 worth of tax savings. Based upon my calculations, the median cost per unit on the historical data that I have is about 131,000. So another way to put this is that you may be able to construct one extra unit, but I don't think that's how developers would. I don't know if that's how they would use this money. It might just be sort of it might be applied to some other way, or just might reduce the amount of debt that they'd have to take on. I don't know exactly, but you're talking about $200,000 worth on a median project. And so whether they use that to construct an extra unit of housing, I don't know.
So I guess, is it reasonable to assume that if it costs less to build, there would be at least some likelihood that you might build more?
Well, again, it depends on the project. So, in the data that I have, some projects have a per unit cost that's significantly lower than others. So, for projects that are very large, they benefit from economies of scale. And so if you're constructing a very large, expensive housing project with a very low per unit cost, it's plausible that you would be able to take your sales tax saving and plow that back into additional housing. However, if you're building something like a housing development with, 10 or less units, your per unit cost might actually be quite high. And so, it might not be there might not be enough sales tax savings there to make you be able to build or have the money to build more additional housing. And so
it's reasonable to assume that if the cost is higher, you're spending more on materials, aren't you?
Yes, but I guess what I don't disagree with anything you're saying.
I'm gonna throw you a lifeline on this one. I don't think you're really in the builder's mentality to know what they're going to do with the savings. And
exactly,
also,
that's what I mean.
Also, Senator Brock, it's a great segue into the next segment we're talking about. No, it's a great segue because any savings that you have by not paying the sales tax is going to lower the construction costs, which means they're going to get less money in the value gap that we're going to talk about. So either way, it's coming out of the state's pocket, and it probably will wash out one for the other in terms of missing middle. So it's a good segue. So and we're running out of time. So I hope we can just move on. And Graham, thank you very much. 1.25 million is the figure we would have to talk to our money committees about. Okay, thank you.
That's just for this year.
Yes. So let's move on. Josh is here. Josh, I love your label says #1 Josh Hanford. Do you know that?
No.
You're the big boss man. So let's just start off by having you in 3 or 5 minutes just explain to us the governor's proposal on missing middle.
Sure. We started this actually two sessions ago with a really even more basic concept, calling it the home builder program, which was up to $50,000 proposal to subsidize the building of homes, modest homes, literally provided to a builder that was going to commit to build homes below a certain price point. Here we are now following up on the basics of a federal proposal, which was in the Build Back Better program to subsidize costs of construction and target affordability. The governor has been seeing the need on this for some time, seeing the stats of the construction starts and the building permits just drop off in this area. We're just not seeing homes built in this price range in Vermont at nearly the level we need to. And so, our goal was to propose supporting this, but realizing it needs to work its way through all of the folks that are actually going to access these funds, put them to use, leverage it for the construction loans and the mortgages that need to be taken out by folks. It was a small part of that larger discussion with only a few principles that are sort of like the lines in the sand from our perspective. Was obviously an upper income on the affordability of the households that should participate. We were following the federal guideline of 140% of AMI. There's been discussions now about maybe bringing that down to a cap of 120. But our top line was 140% AMI. And then looking at what someone in those price ranges could afford, you were getting at different home prices across the state. And the delivery method for homes coming online across the state, whether that's new construction or purchase rehab of old buildings, is quite varied. You have some very sophisticated developers and nonprofit partners in Chittenden County and some other parts of the state that those models don't work as well. So the other red line here in the sand is that this needs to be something that works across the state to address the needs and have some different points of entry for folks that want to participate. And so that's where we are now. Those were the only parameters. Seeing that VHFA was the main partner here, being the largest affordable housing lender in the state, someone that offers first time mortgages and does construction loans. So they were our partner to work with to develop this proposal out and sort of build upon the Build Back Better neighborhood tax credit. We were really hopeful that was going to pass earlier and give us a launching point, and we wanted to be ahead of the game, knowing that program at the federal level would take a year or so to roll out, and try to get something up and going before then to really work out the kinks and have this benefit from now and a fusion of a stable tax credit program. The tax credit program would have required VHFA to establish a new qualified allocation plan, just like they do with the rental low-income housing tax credits, public participation, set affordability limits, all these standards of a public process that they have to go through. And so we were trying to mirror what those guardrails were of that program. And that's the first program we delivered, and we've been talking about for a couple months now. Since then, there's been a lot more efforts to, maybe target more perpetual affordability and things like that weren't in the federal tax credit program. Those weren't conditions of that. We've said all along that the program we were rolling out could be utilized by folks that wanted to do shared equity and perpetual affordability. It would be a new source of income, of capital to help those projects go. Just like the state tax credit is now, just like in some cases, new market tax credits can be. This would be a new source to fill in gaps, but not meant to restrict access to the program to only work in a shared equity housing model. So that's where we are at this point. We're working with VHFA and Champlain Housing Trust and others to talk about what the different elements of this could be that could work for everyone, could work statewide in different markets, and we could be successful on and still meet the overall goals of supporting the production of as many modest homes we can get to market, because it really is about some scale here and actually making some progress in the severe shortage of homes in this area that we are experiencing in Vermont. So happy to try to answer questions and drill deeper, but I think, we have, both VHFA and Champlain Housing Trust on here that have been involved in these discussions and have some maybe more of the detailed mechanics that you might want to dive into.
So in the bill, I noticed that there's language that this money can be used for rehab and acquisition. Are those words loosely put in there? I thought this was all new construction.
No, that was always in there. It's always been in the federal program by design. With examples we give, because they're easier to characterize and people to understand, have always been about it costs $400,000 to build a new home on average in Vermont. The bank construction loan appraisal is only going to give you $375. So there's a value gap in the construction. And then to get that $400,000 home, that we just, allowed a contractor to build because they were only able to get a bank loan for $375. Now that home needs to sell for $340 in order to be affordable to a family in Chittenden County that makes 120% of AMI. And so now we need to subsidize another $60,000 to bring that home down. We've always used that example because it's more standard and understandable. The purchase rehabs are all over the place. You can buy a home in Berry City that's falling down for $60,000. You can buy homes in Richford, Vermont for $50,000, but they're going to need a varying degree of rehab to bring them back up to a marketable condition. And that could be $100,000, it could be $200,000 of rehab. It just varies. So it's too hard to sort of give those examples, but it's always been part of the program.
Okay, but I guess when I look at the VHIP program and the revolving loan program that's yet to be launched, it seems like we got a program for everything, and now we're starting another program for rehab.
It's very different than those others. I mean, this would be sure. So I'm a builder. Let's say I have a crew of 15, and I might see this program as a way for me to buy 3 or 4 of those dilapidated homes and you name it, and put my crews to work on them. I took the risk. I bought them. I'm investing $100,000 of rehab, and now I'm going to make those available to sell as affordable homes for Vermonters. It's very different. It's driven by the industry, the builders, the contractors, the developers, and not a homeowner. The $1 million revolving loan fund is the homeowner qualifies for a mortgage on one of these same homes, but they're not going to get the mortgage because there's too many deficiencies in the home inspection. And so we're giving them a grant loan, to commit to making those repairs so that the mortgage could go forward. It's one's driven from the owner and one's driven from the developer perspective.
And the VHIP program is yet different in the sense that it's a landlord-tenant situation, and
it's only for rental properties.
So this builder is not gonna, you're assuming that he's gonna renovate it under this program and sell it as opposed to rent it out.
Yeah, this program is only for home ownership, missing middle home ownership development pilot program. And the development is rehabbed or new construction, but it's homeowner with a upper limit of the homeowners that are eligible to then benefit from those homes and this investment.
Okay. And so that does explain the rehab element. I think the word acquisition is in there as well. Are we starting a new program to?
Just to purchase those homes that in order to do the work on them, someone's got to acquire them. You know,
Okay, so-
acquisition in our world has a very clear definition for federal funds. And sometimes acquisition has, you can acquire things and then someone else is actually owning it in a short period. So acquisition is just the way to gain ownership of that property so that you can do the necessary work on it.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Senator Clarkson.
Thanks, Josh. It's always good to hear about these time and time again. And by, the time you've done it 3 times, we actually get it, like a good sermon. Missing middle, we just had a presentation from Gus and Jen this morning. And in their presentation, they talk about the homeownership development risk pool program, how that struck us as similar to the missing middle program. So I'd like you to discuss, if you could, the differences and how we could build in permanent, if they're building in permanent affordability, how could we do that here as well?
It is the same program. They were the first funders in. They have a lot of ARPA money to support rental and home ownership. They had a set aside for an innovation fund. And this program, VHFA applied to VHCB to get it started, and VHCB committed $2 million to share in the construction risk pool, which is another part of this program that we've talked about. Folks, contractors, builders, developers, in order to get more construction loans to build these homes, if we can make banks take more risk, because speculative building, even though there's a hot housing market, it's not, there's a lot of risk involved in that. And a lot of banks are, the interest rates are either higher or they're only giving them a portion of what they need for a construction loan. So what VHCB has done is supported this missing middle homeownership development pilot, the exact concept we presented in the beginning, with an initial $2 million grant to help VHFA support the construction lending that's going to be needed as part of this program. And the risk pool that they've supported, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure doesn't necessarily come with perpetual affordability on that risk pool. It's to help more builders access construction loans to build more homes that are in this missing middle period. The funding that they're supporting is an add-in risk. There's no way to track that money to an end user down the road. And I'm sure Maura could chat more about that, or Jen, but it's supporting this very concept as we've laid it out since the beginning.
So why aren't we just putting more money into that program as a term? Creating a missing middle program.
It doesn't have this ability to do all the other things we want, which I believe you do too, that, the sort of ensuring that subsidy can carry forward and help reduce that cost of time over time. It doesn't, folks to build need to access capital to build. Then we are trying to subsidize the costs to allow affordable homes to move in. There's multiple layers in that process. And this is one of the areas that when VHFA started talking about how to make this pilot successful, they heard loud and clear from banks and from large construction companies that they needed access to more construction loan dollars. Banks were not willing to take the same risks that they took a decade ago, and this would help free up more capital to make it happen. And so it's a small part of this overall pilot, and it's not going to solve the other problems we want to throw $50 million into some sort of construction lending that we don't have the same oversight on.
Maybe, we only have 10 more minutes, but Maura is with us and she probably knows the details of this better than anybody. It sounds to me, from a lay perspective, that this is sort of getting at the value gap in loan form rather than grant form. But Maura, you've heard this discussion. I'm sure you've got a couple of comments. Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Maura Collins with Vermont Housing Finance Agency. And Commissioner Hanford laid it out very well, as did Gus earlier this morning. I was listening in that yes, and when I had testified earlier, I had spoken that there were 3 components to this missing middle proposal. The first of which I glossed over quickly for your committee, and that's probably why it didn't land and really resonate, is because we weren't asking you all for money for it. And so it didn't feel appropriate to go into details about what we were doing with VHCB, but we did apply through the innovation fund that VHCB set up to ask for $2 million for this use, as was described. This was an idea that it was the state's builders and bankers came up with to make housing more affordable. And it's going to backstop the construction loan. It does not cover the value gap. The way it's set up looks at 15% of the construction loan. And that is how much we can backstop with this loan support. And so it's a totally different calculation than looking at the total development cost. And I understand that it is complicated, and but that is the nature of home buying, and home building especially. It also does, this program through VHCB that was funded is not a separate program than what we're talking about today. It's just 3 components of one program. It'll be marketed together. The rules will be the same. In fact, if I'm going to be brutally honest, if you all decide not to fund the value gap and affordability gap and the rest of this program, then we would likely turn to VHCB and say we will not be drawing on the $2 million, because that $2 million was always designed to be in partnership with this other funding, where we would build out, as Josh explained, a comprehensive program plan that describes the type of eligible homes, their size, their affordability, the profit limits and all that. This complementary funding that we're talking about today was always designed to work with this money from VHCB and be one program. We just went to 2 different sources to fund the one program.
So what do you mean by backstop? And do you have $2 million sitting in an account as like a surety or something, or do you give out that money at any time? How does that work?
In talking with the state's bankers, they said that different bankers had different preferences of how they'd like us to structure this. And so we are still working through if we're going to allow a menu of options or if we are going to pick one option and go with it. But the choices right now are that VHFA could hold on to the $2 million. And should there be a loan loss in the construction loan, then we would cover that loan loss up to, again, 15% of the loan amount. We would have rules about what would qualify as a loan loss, and that this isn't just that the builder wants more money or that the banker does or anything like that. That would be, there would be some assurances there about what would trigger a loan loss. Another model is that we could actually deposit money with that lender, and that lender would use some of the funds we've deposited in that bank to be the money that the builder receives, and that would lower the cost of the construction loan because they're using this money as part of the loan, and then that gets repaid at the end when the construction loan closes out. Or there could just be the same kind of VHFA holds the money, and the builder has to put up less upfront capital because all builders have to put in equity at the start of construction loans. So there's a couple different models that we are working through. And like I said, we haven't yet decided if all three options are going to be available in each situation, or if there's a reason that we should pick one option and have that be the program. A lot of that really decides on the elements of the larger program that we're talking about today, which is what qualifies as a missing middle home, how much subsidy is there, and the like. So some of these decisions we can't really get out ahead of and make yet until we know what this program fully looks like.
Okay, Senator Clarkson.
So, Maura, you talked about the three components. There's the VHCB component, there's our component. What's the third?
Well, your component is split into two. It's the value gap and the affordability gap. There's been broad-based support for covering the value gap. The affordability gap has been a conversation that I think
Right.
is one reason why CHT is here to speak to.
Got it. Thanks. I sort of thought of those as we were covering. That was sort of one, but
So,
Yep. Can I just make one more thing just to make sure it's perfectly clear, is that while VHCB has not imposed a special permanent affordability, meaning that these homeownership units must be below a certain income level, they know about this discussion that we're having here, and they know that permanent affordability will be a part of this broader program, and I think are relying on that. In addition, in this state, we really do define permanent a permanent subsidy as a revolving loan fund where the money will get paid back and then another home is assisted. That is very common with the homeownership tax credit program. Actually, with the mobile home replacement program, sometimes it comes into play. So I think that VHCB would say that being a revolving loan fund that continually is helping more and more homes protects the public subsidy because it doesn't diminish that subsidy. The only time that would get diminished is, frankly, if we had to draw on it because the loan didn't perform.
would you, if this missing middle program goes through, would you see a need to continue the $2 million program?
Yes, because that's another way we're making housing more affordable, by having the construction loan be cheaper. And so for those homes that are built through the missing middle program, they would be the only ones who have access to this construction loan program funded through VHCB.
Doesn't the value gap grant lower the amount of the construction loan you need to take out?
The value gap will lower the total development cost, but there's still, you could save $15,000 on a construction loan. And so that would lower that total development cost, but it may not lower it to the point where the home will appraise at.
Okay.
To give one example, we heard, a big builder like Snyder Braverman, for them to launch one of their development proposals, they've got $2 million in the bank to guarantee performance and that they're good for their loan. Others don't have that. This construction risk pool that we're developing will help others be able to access these loans and get projects underway. Banks are very risk adverse to doing building like this. Lots can go wrong between when they start the project and delivering it on time, on budget, and getting people into those homes. And this is a way to help the market build more homes. It's not a giveaway. It's not. It works in conjunction with, and it's a tool that's used in lots of different areas. We do it all the time through VITA, and whether it's in the ag industry or everywhere else, where we're putting a little bit of a risk guarantee into a loan pool to help make more lending.
We're familiar with that from our days in finance on CUDs. That's what they do there. So I just we've had a bunch of offline conversations about perpetual affordability. I don't know if there's two sides to that equation as far as I'm concerned. The dollar amount that's preserved in the home, but also subsequent buyers. Are there any requirements on subsequent buyers in terms of their income levels? and that kind of thing. And whether there's any way to address that the way it's addressed in, I guess, all other forms of perpetual affordability in the state of Vermont, or is the second and third home buyer, even though the cost of the home is lessened by whatever amount, able to be a cash buyer that just walks in, that has a lot of money and says, I want to take advantage of this subsidy that was given a long time ago? And is there any way to control that in a practical fashion? So just we should put our thinking caps on that as well. Senator Clarkson.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I had a 12 o'clock with the pro tem that quickly pulled together meeting on another issue that I need to scoot to.
Well, we're going to finish up now.
I apologize.
Stay tuned. We're talking about this housing, and mostly housing, for the next 2 days to see if we can get this bill out. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your patience, Chris, Jen. Michael, never got to you, but we'll figure it out. It's that time of year. I apologize. A lot to be decided here.